Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon here at the Watergate. I'm Daniela Fair. I'm the publisher here at Defense One, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Global Business Briefing of 2019. Just a little background on this series. Defense One's Global Business Briefing series focuses on the intersection of business and international security. Created by Marcus Weisgerber, our global business editor, this series features conversations with top commercial leaders about the defense industry, its customers, and their future. Today, Marcus will be joined by Tony Moraco, CEO of SAIC, to discuss the strategic outlook for SAIC, including an update on its acquisition of Engility, the push into armored vehicles market, and the company's space-related business. Tony joined SAIC in 2006, and he served in numerous leadership positions prior to his appointment as CEO in 2013. Before joining SAIC, he was Deputy General Manager of Mission Systems in Boeing's Space and Intelligence Systems Organization, as well as the Director of Homeland Security Technology Integration. So we're really excited to have him here with us this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I invite these gentlemen out. Before we get the program underway, if you have a cell phone, we'd appreciate it if you'd silence it, but don't turn it off. Please participate in the conversation. We encourage you to tweet your comments at #D1 Global Briefing. Also, we'll be videotaping the conversation this afternoon and airing it on Facebook Live. Hello, everyone on Facebook Live. And we'll be sending out a copy of the video so you can distribute it to any of your colleagues who are unable to join us today. And with that, please join me in welcoming Marcus and his distinguished guest, Tony Moraco.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out to the Watergate today for our first Global Business Briefing of 2019. I want to thank Tony Moraco for joining us here today, and thank all of you. We'll have more of these to come throughout the year. As Daniela mentioned, Tony and I are going to talk for a little bit here at the beginning, and then we'll turn the conversation over to you guys. And also to those watching on Facebook Live, hello. And you could tweet your questions, and I will try to get to them at #D1 Global Briefing, as Daniela mentioned. So very timely discussion right now, particularly due to the government shutdown and the amount of business that SAIC has that is impacted by this. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but I always like to start off and just have our guests kind of introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they ended up here, so running a defense company. So Tony, why don't you take us through a little bit about how you ended up here?
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So I have a civil engineering degree from Virginia Tech, and I started in, got a geodetic sciences, so I had my master's degree. So think in terms of remote sensing and mapping. First job at Autometrics, small intelligence company. I was convinced that someone said that if you look at classified work, there's some interesting things going on. You might give it a try. So I said, okay, that sounds good. So came out of grad school, did that, worked in imagery intelligence, now known as geospatial intelligence, pretty much. So small company, lots of activities, general manager type skills. First job was Tomahawk cruise missile planning, so applying that targeting, mapping capabilities to that. And then did a wide range of different development programs throughout the years. Boeing acquired, I'd worked at TASK for 1 year, again, within the mapping community. And then with Boeing acquired Autometric in 2000, had the opportunity to work in an obviously much larger company in space and intelligence systems, and then Phantom Works, so kind of split my time. And so that moved from the mapping and imagery and the data itself, really to the collection side. So that got me into the satellites and payloads and different kinds of technologies in the collection side. And so really an end-to-end from collection through processing and then ultimately analysis. SAIC in 2006 kind of left Boeing in part to really drive and work inside of more of an information systems company versus a large platform. And SAIC, before we split, was about $10 billion and offered kind of a balance of large company resources, but kind of a small company federated businesses, and allowed you to kind of have some flexibility in a very entrepreneurial environment. In 2013, we split the company. I've been running about a $4 billion national security business inside of the larger SAIC. And then when the CEO opportunity moved over, we left the national security intelligence business with our former parent, Leidos, and I moved in more of a federal, civilian, and DoD portfolio, where we started the company in 2013 from that spin, did an acquisition with Cytor about 4 years ago now in the intelligence community, and then recently the acquisition of Engility. So from mapping to collection to a wide range of defense, federal, civilian, IT-based information systems is kind of my career track, and here we sit today. So thank you.
So you've started this week off a little bit larger, as you just referenced, than you did last week, with Engility now becoming part of SAIC. Talk to us a little bit about Engility and what attracted you to Engility, and what it's going to do, how you feel it's going to help you as a company compete in the space.
Sure. So SAIC a month ago was a $4.5 billion public company. About half our business was in defense. We had a modest portion of our portfolio in intelligence community, and the other part of federal civilian. We looked at acquisitions and part of our strategic plan to expand our market access in certain domains as well as increase our capabilities. The Cytor acquisition was very concentrated at the National Reconnaissance Office, and we were looking for a much more diverse intelligence agency portfolio. And so we looked at Engility, had a very strong, long legacy in the intelligence space. And we also looked at the space market itself, space systems, with more recent conversations around space, the relevancy of space, elements around resiliency, and how we can actually manage and control U.S. interests in space. Was another attraction that we saw that as a market opportunity. Engility filled both the space and intelligence components of that. So with that, about a $2 billion revenue portfolio, so we're now at $6.5 billion. About 8,000 people, so we're at 23,000 altogether. And a substantial component of that is a large increase in our cleared workforce, as Engility has about 6,000 employees combined with SAIC's 9,000 or 10,000. We're now in the market about 16,000 classified cleared employee base, and that gives us, again, broad market access in a very competitive workforce environment today.
So what's the, just as you're talking there, I'm thinking, you said a lot of Engility's work is classified work. How difficult is that, or how does that make it, with, I guess, the challenges in that, and or just go through the process maybe of how you go from one company acquiring another company like that, and how you get, I guess, visibility into stuff they're doing, just kind of process-wise, because as we were just chatting, the deal was announced in September, I believe. I was just saying I was laying on the beach on my honeymoon when I noticed on Twitter that this had happened, and instinctively wanted to write a story about it, but it was told by my wife I couldn't do it. But just kind of, yeah, probably a good idea. Happy wife, happy life, I keep being told. But no, talk to us a little bit about just, I guess, process-wise. How challenging is it? Do you get full insight into, I guess, like everything that they're working on?
Yeah, through normal due diligence, you kind of understand what the company's portfolio looks like, how that fits, find the complements. We're very pleased and found very early that the cultures of the two companies, which are a critical component of any integration, very compatible. We had strategies facing similar markets, so our business development efforts were very much aligned. Similar research and development capabilities and technology. So there's a lot of overlap in capabilities and culture, yet it was really a much broader intelligence community play. And the larger capacity, having more resources, the barriers of entry in the intelligence community are somewhat challenging given the different programs and how things are aligned, so it's very compartmented. So tough to grow organically and apply past performance. So we always felt that acquisition allowed us probably a quicker access to critical mass in the intelligence space. And so we explored that, found that there's a different set of agencies that Engility brings to bear beyond the NRO. And so that also now gives us larger capacity. The business is driven by past performance on prior contracts. The government kind of uses that as a source selection criteria. And now with this extra capacity, we can bid on a larger number of larger contracts. In part, given the constraints that we have both in government and in industry on cleared resources, the customers understood that. And so now proposals in a lot of cases are past performance driven and qualified personnel that you actually have employed. Historically, maybe you might submit a key personnel resume or two, Well, now you may have to submit 50 or 100 to really qualify and really provide confidence that you can execute. So this really increases our capacity to provide end-to-end services in a wide range of customer sets within that space because of the step function we got.
So as we talked a few weeks ago up at your investor conference, that actually having the government's now actually asking you for people's like resumes, if you will, when you bid. Well, in the past they hadn't.
That's correct, and so you have to actually submit as employees. In the past, maybe perhaps, and even in some other areas, a bid strategy is potentially that you'll bid and you intend to hire the incumbent contractor and all their employees, and so that's a bit of a risk if that does not happen. So having the organic resources to be able to apply, again, supports that past performance and the confidence to actually migrate and expand business within the intelligence community and other agencies.
So we're coming off of two stable years of defense spending, and kind of now, I think as I was saying earlier, I feel like we're in a kind of previewing what we might have awaiting us again in defense-wide and government-wide later on this year when the fiscal year ends. But talk for one first before we get to the shutdown impact a little bit about where you see this big macro defense budget playing out, because we have a Budget Control Act, caps scheduled to come back if the law isn't changed. So we basically have roughly a $100 billion delta between where defense spending could end up and where we've gotten indications from the administration where they want to go with it. Sure. So,
well, I think this historically as sequestration kicked in 2013. Actually, it was the first week of our spin, so we spun as a public company, government shutdown. So we've been through this process a couple times and very resilient. But the budget process, the budget activities today, since sequestration, really the process is now more common with we've lived through a 2-year budget deal that allowed Congress, well, sequestration, it won't get repealed perhaps, provided a mechanism to provide government funding at a much higher level than sequestration intended. So we've been operating above the so-called caps based on deals between the Congress and the administration, and we expect that to continue. The recent deal, we're in year government 19. There's an 18-19 with the second year of that 2-year deal. This is record level spend for the Defense Department. The 16-17 budget was slightly smaller, figure maybe $715 billion. We're about $733 billion now. So my expectations are that with, particularly in the demand, as you think about the national security strategy, national defense strategy, the demands, the critical elements in space, cyber, in weapon systems and the like, the demand signal is still very strong. So I would at least speculate that the budgets may not be maintained at the current 18-19 2-year deal, although that may be someone's intentions. But I don't think it'll go much below a 16-17 level. So net, you're maybe in a $20-25 billion swing, but we'll have to see how the politics play out. So big market, huge demand. It's dependent upon budget deals. So hopefully we'll get Congress and administration kind of talking again and try and look at a 2021 deal. And that gives the customers the ability to provide broader planning as they execute and award contracts and execute their mission.
And then the Budget Control Act is behind us.
Well, it's still there. It's a looming, it's law.
2 more years, right?
It is law, and until it's repealed, which good luck on getting everyone to agree to that. But it's unfortunate that it's in place, yet we found mechanisms to work around it. Because there's original intention of being there where, we would be more budget constraint. Hasn't really played out.
So let's talk about the shutdown. We're in day 32, I believe, so a month old. You guys have been pretty forward about the impact, both at your investor day a couple weeks ago up in New York, and since then. Talk a little bit about just kind of as a company that has business within defense and non-defense, how it's impacting you right now.
Yeah, our portfolio is about 50% defense, about 18% in intel, and about 30+%, 35% in federal civilian agencies. So it's a very diverse portfolio. With 23,000 folks, we probably have over 1,000 people impacted, so it's about 5% of the population. So it's a material number. Principally FAA, NASA, USDA, some examples of agencies that are experiencing the shutdown. We've tried to mitigate that in large part through understanding that mission, understand our funding lines, extending and stretching dollars where we could. Employees have been unfortunately impacted, both on the federal side through the furlough, on the private side through use of vacation to maintain their cash flow. Some companies have adjusted that based on, some now looking at furloughs given the duration. Small companies in particular, challenge, you hear that in the news relative to financing and cash flows are big impacts. We've elected to also extend our employees what we would call administrative leave. So that allows our staff to basically charge to an SAIC account, and then perhaps we have an opportunity to recover in time some of that work, not all of it, but some of it. But that allows us to maintain and retain the staff. We're in a very competitive workforce environment, so retention's critical. So we see that as a critical investment. Take care of the staff. We see SAIC really as a broad career destination, and so we want to be true to that form. But it is getting harder and harder. The cash impacts, I think, are probably driving the most. We'll recover on the revenues, but cash, just as an example, the billings are no longer getting paid, and companies like ours, we're probably north of $100 million of unpaid bills, and so we have the fortune of being large enough at scale to be able to have the financing to back up payrolls and the like. But a lot of small companies concentrated in those agencies don't have that flexibility, and you're hearing more and more about that in the press because it is really impacting business. And I'll make one last point is that the longer this goes, the harder it gets to recover. And so just, the federal employees will go back to work someday when they can get paid in retroactively. But that just starts the process of working off the backlog. So a month down, we're expecting for contract awards, modifications, invoices getting paid, employee hires, reactivating, that we're probably 2 to 3 months of recovery time for government officials to work off their backlog while, in fact, they're working on, the day of the day work. So, we're trying to, balance that in the long run, but it is having a huge impact, and the longer it goes, the harder it gets. So it's hopefully we can get to some resolution here very, very soon.
In terms of your employees, so how much longer, do they have until they're going to be, more severely, hit by it? Because you said they were able to take, you're giving them extra leave, they're able to take their leave, but when's the breaking point?
We're trying to work in kind of 2-week blocks. So this administrative leave, use of vacation, and stretching some dollars is in place till the end of January. Turns out our fiscal year ends at the end of January, so we're 1 month off calendar. So it's having an impact on our last quarter and our year end. So we're trying to manage, that as a public company. That's why when we were in New York, try to be transparent on the impact, because we're going to have to report results fairly soon. A lot of our peers and companies, again, if this gets resolved fairly soon, they have the full calendar quarter to recover some of that. And so the impact from a financial reporting perspective may be less impactful, but it's around the clock time. So we're in a 2-week cycle. We'll reassess 1st of February and just status where we are relative to negotiations, and hopefully the government's open by then.
So what are your, in terms of, I was reading a Post article about suppliers and kind of just impact down in the supply chain. I know, again, you're not major manufacturer, but subcontractors of yours and stuff and such. What are they kind of telling you right now? What's their biggest fear?
Well, we keep them informed as far as the contract status. They are following through with probably vacation. Some have furloughed some staff, kept them on the books, but haven't laid them off. I'm not aware of any of our suppliers who've physically laid off someone at this moment, but again, that's a potential risk. And we've been cautious and conscious of bills and pays, so we're current on invoices, to our supplier base. So we're trying to make sure that we're on top of that. So there's really not a big impact on that end. But I will likely see more requests to help cover some of that from us, the smaller companies, over time.
Are you hearing any concerns from the Pentagon yet, from folks over there about because what happens on one side of the house impacts usually the other side of the house, or have they expressed any concerns or anything they can do to help you out?
I think there's obviously more situational awareness. They're not directly affected per se on the program since they're funded, but the companies that do support them are making decisions. I'll use ourselves as an example. So in this era of high demand for mission capability, faster time to market to serve mission needs, and rallying industry to invest more for innovative solutions, I can only spend $1 once. And so the next 2 weeks, I'm spending on labor and investment to protect our smart talent. And that's 2 weeks of labor, a few $1 million that I don't have to invest in a technology or an integration effort on behalf of the government. So indirectly, there's a huge impact as it's all kind of interconnected, and the tech transfer into the DoD and out of the DoD plays into that. So I think they're getting more attention because industry is more affected than the federal agency employees that were isolated outside the DoD.
Right. As you just said, like investing in like IR&D type investing. Have you had to look at any of that yet? Or?
Not quite yet. We're kind of assess that as we go. At this point, we think we've got enough capacity, but it will be again. Every business is making trades on what you're going to invest in and how you're going to carry your own portfolio forward, and how you're going to protect your own people and your supply chain.
So I'm sure we'll get to more shutdown questions in the Q&A portion. I feel my phone vibrating in my pocket right now with all the questions, I guess, coming in from Facebook. But let's pivot to space for a little bit and talk about space, where you have a lot of business. President Trump has made no secret that he wants a Space Force, independent branch of the military. We're still waiting to see what that final plan looks like. But in the meantime, we've seen the Pentagon and the White House create a U.S. Space Command, or at least have advanced plans to do that. I don't think they've changed the signs over yet in Colorado. But talk a bit about the space and space business you're expecting, and space funding, and how a new service and even the command might impact or change funding levels.
Sure. Well, today again, with Engility's resource pool, SAIC is very well positioned to serve end-to-end capabilities in space systems. So we do a lot of simulation and modeling for architectures and constellations. We do a lot of launch support, whether it be in rocket and propulsion, payload services and engineering to ensure that the payload itself can fly, space control and space operations once assets are in space, and then also the ground side of collections and ground operations and command and control. So we have an end-to-end view of the space market, even some support into the commercial space segment. So we've got a good lens of the space community, the resources that are available. I think as we think about the mission in space, and whether again it's collection, whether it's communications, wide range of elements within space, GPS, all components, it's important that we kind of pay attention to all aspects of that. The space organizations, again, we support most of the major ones between National Reconnaissance Office, the Air Force Space Commands, NASA. And so I think we've got, again, good optics of where the portfolios are, where the mission demands are, things that are already in the queue. And we'll help, and I think through our engineering skills, can help the government navigate how best perhaps to organize as those resources come together. So it's still not clear which agencies will be brought together under an umbrella. Expectation would be that they would consolidate those funding sources, maybe add some more. There's been some talk of some added funding, which we have to track. So who's in charge? Not sure yet. The space mission is very much in demand, and we're currently working with the different organizations, and we'll kind of help the government assess pros and cons of which agencies might be included in those mission areas or not. But I think mission's going to drive the conversation, and then we'll think about the custodians and agents that actually drive and lead those with budgets to follow. But it's going to be a tricky process overall. And as a new force, a new service, it just will have its challenges given the scale. It could be substantially smaller than any other service. And as we've seen in budget environments, it's a little tough to operate with less flexibility given less critical mass and funding. So just a concern or criticism on where we're going and how that budget needs to be played out.
Is there a preference, I guess, from an industry perspective on where you'd like to see the way acquisition is, where however they structure the space acquisition from, there's talk of this Missile Defense Agency, Space Development Agency like group. To do that I guess from an industry perspective, is having a single focal point better than lots of different focal points?
It's probably too early to tell. We've seen models where there's been some centralization of resources. I think industry collectively follows mission, follows the customer's alignment. Acquisition offices that obviously serve the mission, whether they're centralized or co-located with the different agencies, is an area we'll watch. Sometimes you get some efficiencies on centralization of those acquisition services, but you ought to be cautious that it does not get divorced from the mission and the mission need. You got to make sure that you're investing properly and you don't have a separation of the funding and budget side and the mission side. So as long as we can keep some continuity of the two, we'll get probably better value, and I think industry will just respond to whatever organization flows out of any reorgs that go forward. One example perhaps recently with the Army is they stood up Futures Command. We kind of pivoted and adjusted how we're serving different components as the Army's kind of realign some of their resources. So we'll probably do the same. Industry will be very responsive. We're very close in understanding the customers. So I think we can kind of be pretty agile to be aligned to where they're headed.
Let's talk about the Army. And if you've been to a trade show recently, you've noticed armored vehicles parked underneath your logo, which most people, I guess, wouldn't necessarily immediately think. I know it's caught my attention a few years ago. Like, wait, what is this over here? It's been a market where you've been trying to go, pitched vehicles to the Marine Corps and the Army. They haven't bid yet, but kind of talk to us about kind of coming off those two efforts to actually get in front of them and show them what you can do, kind of where you foresee that business going.
Sure. So again, broad, complex, diverse portfolio that we have. So SAIC is a technology integrator. We don't build a lot of IP or subsystems, but we're an integrator of those subsystems. In tactical vehicles, we would partner up with transmission providers and armor providers and the like. And we really understand the mission, the requirements, and with a broader market access, we can kind of bring the best of breed to the solution set. And so we create and manage that supply chain. The platform integration work, and what you're commenting on is our efforts to disrupt in part the tactical combat vehicle marketplace. There's a couple OEMs that have dominated that space. So we felt that as, again, some things aligned for us. SAC's long history with mine-resistant vehicles and command and control MRAPs, where we supported the integration of command and control to support that mission area. So we have insights on tactical vehicles. We're probably more in the cockpit than our armor on the outside. But we saw that our experience and mission understanding on tactical vehicles was relevant. We saw it as an opportunity to be involved in that market space, in large part because the customers' expectations and demands to field systems faster are predicated on, through the solicitations, mature technologies, non-developmental items, and the ability then to integrate those. And so not develop them from scratch, not a 10-year development program, 2-year integration, 2-year engineering. So the combination of our experience, we felt we could scale up to the larger vehicle because we had a non-developmental acquisition strategy. And we applied that to 2 Marine Corps programs, amphibious assault vehicle and amphibious combat vehicle, as well as recently with the Army with mobile protected firepower. We're unsuccessful on the last 2, the ACV and MPF. Government's still aligned with some of the traditional OEMs. Our sense is that we'll continue to refine our hardware complex system integration strategy. We're not going to walk away from the larger platforms per se, but we're going to continue to provide that niche. And as I mentioned earlier on past performance, our customers not always are early adopters, a little risk averse at times, and so industry, again, past performance, you kind of have to show them what it can look like. And so what you saw in the booths at some of the shows, were those prototypes that we actually invested in to build and test. And so we're successful in that. And so, again, we're anxious to further that non-developmental innovation, integration, and implementation is kind of how we think of it, which are critical to moving mission capability to the field faster. And I think our broad market access is a differentiator at lower cost because we don't have a factory to carry the overhead infrastructure. So we think it's better value on a broader market with higher opportunities for technology integration over the life of the program. So we'll continue to reassess that, but we think we are differentiated in that because we can do some large, complex system integration, and the vehicles were just one example of that.
Is the Pentagon ready or open for disruption? I'm hearing that term not just from you these days. I'm hearing it from others. I guess, are they open to it, or do you see them becoming open to it? And what can you do to perhaps convince them that they should be open to it?
Well, my take right now is that given the mission and the risks and the demand for mission capability, the customers are all aligned on what they need and what they want. How they get it is kind of the challenge. I'll use the term commander's intent. You know, the 3 stars, 4 stars, the agency department heads want that innovative, agile, quote, higher risk. You know, Secretary Lord and Griffin and others are trying to push that agenda forward. And so I think there is intent. Industry's trying to be responsive to that. I think part of our challenge is the government on their side needs to further educate the acquisition workforce at the program office level and the program manager level, and demonstrate, if you will, from above as a leader that you can take those risks. And I don't think we've necessarily crossed over that. Industry's trying to do our part to show how we can manage and mitigate that risk through the proposals and efforts, but I do think that we got to get the acquisition workforce and the program manager level aligned on the source selections and the activities that play out, because I think that will then get us into that agile space. And I think it's only going to be through examples and positive reinforcement that you can take this risk and you can still be successful. But that's a change management problem that I think we're on the right track, but I think we're still kind of moving up that maturity curve and aren't quite there yet.
Are there international opportunities for the vehicles that you're looking at all?
Well, we'll continue to face the U.S. government. We've used international partners because the mature technology existed elsewhere. So we would be more of an integrator and an importer, if you will, of international technologies as opposed to an exporter.
So staying on the topic of technology, you guys are based just, I guess, from our vantage point down the road in Virginia. We have Amazon setting up shop somewhere over there off in Crystal City. Talk about how, you know, as a technology company, as being here in the Washington area with, I believe, about a quarter of your workforce is around here. Talk to us about how that and just in other just companies in this area impacts the way you think of where you base people and kind of getting good talent.
Well, as I mentioned, the competitive workforce, you know, is across in this high technology area is in huge demand. Our customers with the military bases in the defense sector, you know, are in their own geographic areas. They've had an inclination, almost demand, to have technical talent co-located. So a lot of you know, our company and others are co-located in those same cities, whether it's Huntsville, Charleston, San Diego, wherever you may be. We are seeing, given the challenge to staff all the programs and the government to staff organically, we're seeing a bit more openness to a virtual workforce. And so we kind of interpret it as kind of an onshoring where we've created a technology gateway in Cookeville, Tennessee, for example, connected with Tennessee Tech to build a pipeline of talent in a lower cost area, typically applicable on the more of the software side than kind of the hands-on, something you can deploy, so whether it be cyber or agile development. So we're starting to see a bit more openness for a more dispersed workforce as one opportunity to counter the competitive challenge. Amazon is one example. We've talked about Silicon Valley, non-traditional providers in this space. Someone asked me before if, do you see them as more of a threat or an enabler? I'm biased as more of an enabler. I mean, if you think about Amazon Web Services, and cloud technologies, we would not be a leading cloud migration provider in the federal government had there not be the cloud. And so, it's a kind of a balance of the two. To exploit the technologies, I think collectively we see faster technology development in the commercial and private sector. The government, I think, is shifted to that and accepts that. And so that's, again, this trend of non-developmental by mature capabilities that have been proven out, reduce my risk, reduce my cost, because there's a broader market for those things. So I know in this market locally, there's going to be high demand for talent. That's just another competitor for that, another company. I don't see the dynamics changing dramatically. But Amazon's got a great brand, and it's definitely going to draw attention. And frankly, the shutdown doesn't help as far as creating uncertainty in this marketplace. People are, if you recall, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of, and still a challenge on security clearances. And so there's a couple dynamics in serving mission on the government side that we're still working through. Because you can't have an employee or a potential employee wait 3 to 6 months or a year for a career opportunity. They will maybe accept the job offer to work at the Defense Department, but if you can't get them cleared, they're going to find work. And so our conversion to actual hires, because of that lag, is actually fairly low. And so you spend a lot of money to establish that portfolio and that queue, but the return on that is a challenge for all of us. Commercial sector will continue to drive that same equation. So mission drives the attractionness into this space. We try and highlight that as having an impact as a career destination, diversity. But it'll be a constant play. I think on the compensation side, everybody's pretty much at par. Again, so a new entry like an Amazon might disrupt that a bit. So we're all trying to be attentive to that. But generally, we know what the labor markets are, and we tend to adjust our cost structures to be aligned with that so we can hire the right people. It's a volume problem right now and capacity, and so this dispersion may be a way to offset that.
Are you seeing any, we're going to get to you guys in the audience just in a minute now. I know Lynn Dougal, who was at Engility, who was the CEO there, she talked about the security clearance issue a lot. Are you seeing any type of progress there in actually clearing the backlog? There
is some progress. It's right now between OPM with the DSS, Defense Security Services. So there's a lot of movement. There is forward progress. There's different elements to make more efficient the background investigation process, and also so that would kind of drive the pipeline of new employees into the community. The second is in periodic reinvestigation. So current policy is that every 5, 7, 10 years, now that you're already cleared, you get reinvestigated, right? Maybe not as intense as the background, but that takes up resources. And in this era of continuous monitoring, continuous evaluation, insider threat, at least on the industry side, we are doing more to increase the security confidence of the employee base. Technology is allowing us to monitor networks and data, and so we can track if you stored something on a device, who took it, where were you, what accesses do you have. So technology is combining with that and our ability to, I think, collectively to kind of manage a very challenging environment, but we're kind of working across the board.
I would imagine the shutdown doesn't help for getting security clearances processed through.
No, it does not.
All right. So I'm monitoring the phone a little bit. I'm seeing more tweets about my socks than actually questions, which aren't very exciting today. But who's got a question in the audience? There we go.
Hi, Matt Bainart from Defense Daily. I wanted to jump back to the combat vehicle topic for a quick second. 2 questions. One, the Army is looking now towards its next generation combat vehicle effort, the optionally manned fighting vehicle. So I was wondering, one, you've mentioned continued interest in that space, but specifically, is there interest in NGCV? And along with that, what are some of the lessons you've learned from an ACV effort and mobile protected firepower that you're maybe using to retool your strategy for an area like NGCV?
Thanks. Yeah, we are currently a contractor in support of the Next Gen Combat Vehicle contract, so we are involved in that today, and so that's, again, part of the portfolio. So we'll continue to work that. That's, again, technology integration, next-gen capabilities, I think in terms of prototyping, so that very much fits our portfolio and our mindset. The combat vehicle programs, we learned a lot relative to supply chain management. There's a wide range of components and production inventory management to move from engineering and prototyping to production. And that's a step function, and we've been investing in that capability so that we have more capacity to do that well. Introduce some systems to allow us to better manage that supply chain and inventory in line with the financial aspects of the program. So we've invested in some infrastructure, I think, which allow us to continue to work in those complex environments. And we think that, again, differentiates us from some of our traditional government services players who tend not to do as much on that hardware side. So we'll continue to find that white space, and that's how we've one of the things we've learned out of those tactical vehicle programs and develop partnerships throughout the world, actually.
Questions? Mike.
Hi, Michael Bruno with Aviation Week and Space Technology. Speaking of longer cycle hardware work, what is your mix now? And does this return to government shutdown and mixed government control trigger you to reassess what that mix should be?
Mix in what way? Can you be more specific?
So your revenue mix of longer cycle hardware versus shorter cycle services.
Yeah, the longer cycle is probably less than 10% of our overall portfolio. Probably actually closer to 5 now with Engility, that getting to $6 billion. So we saw it as a growth opportunity in top line, as well as then the continued integration forward as a disruptor, as a new market access for us. So the broader hardware integration, we do some work with torpedoes with the Navy, do some things in helicopters and aviation. So we're going to manage that, but on the hardware complexity side, it's again less than 10% of the $6 billion at this point.
Do you reassess that in light of the shutdown?
Probably not. I'll still be an optimist that the shutdown is temporary and that we'll continue a long-term strategy. I don't think the customers in the defense sector in particular, their strategic plans and investment profiles are going to change substantially. So I really think there'll be a continuity of mission. We really won't do any shift in our overall portfolio strategy. It's really down at the opportunity level, and we manage that by account. So we have a very holistic view of the pipeline, and then we try and align that so that our probability to win is highest, again, based on things we're really good at, past performance, and the areas that we can kind of serve our customers in the best way we can on a cost schedule basis.
Questions? In the front. We'll bring a microphone.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Bressler with PW Communications. I'm wondering whether or not the current shutdown has given you pause to consider moving somewhat away from your defense focus more into a commercial, working commercially. I know some other major companies I've seen that shift. I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I think maybe our diversity at this moment, we have we have a small number, but some very large state and local IT modernization contracts. So that would be an adjacent market. Similar capabilities. You think about modernization to the cloud, legacy applications, states and counties. We're currently a contractor for the Commonwealth of Virginia, just this last year, in migrating them to a upgraded platform.
What about this B2B?
B2B, I'm a little more skeptical from a traditional government contractor. Our infrastructure, our accounting rules, our compliance overhead is still very prevalent. I've personally not witnessed a lot of successes of government contractors moving to commercial. I think there's a lot of opportunities we see a lot of diversified IT companies that are commercial that have a public sector component. I think that works better and that technology flows to public sector a little better. So I don't see us moving aggressively outside. We have a very robust market, great talent base. We've proven we can grow in the market even during shutdowns and challenges through these last few years. So we're going to stay focused on U.S. government interests, the mission, with maybe some adjacency in state and local, where that IT, because again, as I talked about as early adoption, we do see in state and local that they are probably a little more risk tolerant, and they are early adopters for technology. So we can potentially use state and local as that kind of entry point, test bed. We also use what we sell. So we bring those technologies as a large enterprise. So we can use that then and flow that into the federal space with a past performance that we can talk about. So that's how we would leverage a slight adjacency. Thanks.
Any more questions? Well, I got one more. We've seen the Pentagon with a major focus out west toward Silicon Valley, particularly Ash Carter's initiatives during the Obama administration. But a lot of that has continued, and they've set up their DIUX outposts, if you will. I know back at the time there was a lot of pushback from folks in the tech community around here, saying, hey, we do technology work here and we do it pretty damn well, and we also know how to work with you. Have you seen any of of a change since then in just the way or approach at all being taken by the defense officials?
I think it's maturing. Again, the theme of let's seek out mature capabilities. Commercial is advancing faster. We, the government, are open to a non-traditional provider. I think stimulated let's go look directly at the commercial markets, high technology and Silicon Valley brand. Let's go to Silicon Valley and see if we can exploit some emerging technologies that we can use on the U.S. government's interest side. So that kind of started the process. We've been out there a number of times. I think at this point there's still a good complement of the two. I think that as SAIC in particular, as an integrator, I think we offer a value proposition that serves both the supplier, the commercial company, as well as the government, in that the commercial companies, their barriers of entry to federal are government compliance, right? And cost exposure, they're in a commercial model without exposing all their costs and all their rates, a very different approach. Government contractors can manage the federal contracting domain and still protect the IP and the price strategies of our suppliers. So we can be a channel for that technology, integrate it, and then implement it. And on the government side, again, on the implementation component, we can provide higher confidence that we can navigate cost, schedule, risk, programmatics, program reviews, congressional oversight in some cases. We can manage that as a tool, as a resource, and really provide the commercial insights to the government, but not bring in the risk components of having a supplier who isn't necessarily navigating inside that federal space. So I think it's a good partnership. I think the interest is there, and that, again, contributes to this non-traditional advanced technologies. Let's do technology transfer more effectively and really take a broad market view than just isolating on a few companies individually. I do think that we've also tried to reinstill that there is innovation here on the East Coast, in Virginia, in Maryland. It's not isolated to one geographic area. We make a lot of investments collectively at all different sizes of companies, from the large primes to the small entrepreneur. And so that innovation exists everywhere. And so if that's a model, perhaps we just need to kind of open that aperture. But OTAs, prototyping, we talked earlier, Shark Tank-like environments that give exposure to customers and provide channels for that technology are very, very important. So again, it's a larger ecosystem. I think I'm encouraged by a broader play and broader footprint. And I think SAIC can play a dominant role in making sure that we can help in that integration for integration, innovation, and, as I said, implementation. Because half the challenge is getting it in place while our customers are actually managing their missions. And it's hard to get from a present state system to a next gen without breaking it, and you don't have the luxury of turning it off, waiting a year, and turning it back on. So implementation is a critical component of a service we provide, and that's a good partnership with the innovators as well as with the customer.
All right, last try from the audience. Any more questions? Okay, well, that's a good place I think we could wrap up on. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I want to thank Tony for coming and chatting with us today for a little bit. And also, we will soon, under the business tab on Defense One, it might actually be launched as I'm sitting here. We will have a repository for all of these events. This is now the 5th one of these we've held. We plan to hold several more in the coming months. So we hope to see you again real soon. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.